Okay, Mr. Chair, we are live.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you, and welcome to the AIB meeting. For today's date is April the 13th, 2023. We have a number of items on the agenda for us today, so we're going to try to get to them as expeditiously as possible. We've started something that is a little bit new for us in our meetings. That is that we will have an open session whereby we will hear comments or questions or issues raised by the public. I'm not certain how many we have. As I last recall, we have 2. Is that still correct, Rachel?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll hold the adoptions of our previous minutes until we've had our comments from the public. And so I'm not sure how we're going to technically do that. So why don't you take over and probably guide us through the 2 speakers we'll have here for today.
Sure. So we did have 2 members of the public asked to speak at today's meeting, and they are both actually in the waiting room. Mr. Chair, you've given them each 3 minutes to make their statements, and so we will go ahead and admit Mr. Heddleman and Ms. Zogby to the meeting, and then call on Mr. Heddleman first. Okay, they're both in the meeting now, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Mr. Heddleman, why don't you go start first? You have 3 minutes. And thank you for coming before us today, and you may proceed.
Thank you, Chair Leggett, Board, and Ms. Heiss. Thank you for the chance to offer these comments in addition to my written comments. I greatly admire your efforts. Your job is near impossible, too much work, and too little time and staff to do it. And confusion and tension about accountability among the AIB, MSDE, and LEAs is baked into the blueprint. As you know, the AIB was established because of MSDE's past pattern of unresponsiveness and failure to hold LEAs accountable. Yet you have lagged so far on the most important aspect of accountability and effective implementation: the requirement of state-level standards for accountability that set a floor, not a ceiling, for local discretion. Such standards don't exist, as many advocacy groups assert. The Moore Transition Team recently recommended for special education new state-level standards to hold local education authorities accountable for provisions of evidence-based services. The same applies to general education. MSDE has also omitted other accountability measures like uniform data, local monitoring, and evidence-based expectations for student progress. Further, it hasn't shown its own internal capacity to hold LEAs and itself accountable. MSDE seems to resist accountability standards because the state board seems to believe in maximum local control. Superintendent Chaudhry recently said that MSDE has no legal authority to require LEAs to follow the science of reading. That's wrong as a matter of law, and it's a disaster for implementation. The blueprint is at a crossroads, and the AIB is charged with steering MSDE and LEAs in the right direction. MSDE and LEAs can achieve a win-win complementary relationship, which LEAs will actually welcome if it's done right. Please address this with your past openness and transparency. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Our next presenter, are there any questions? I'm sorry. Are there any questions or comments? Let me just acknowledge and thank you for your many memorandums and the other additional provided. It's been a valuable service. I hope that we will be able to respond to as many of them as possible as we go through this process. Just state that this is an ongoing process, not a one-year, one-off process. So hopefully we'll be able to get some more definitive responses to some of the questions you've had. But thank you very much for not only today, but your past comments as well.
Thank you for your openness. Thanks so
Yes.
much.
Yes, sir. Our next presenter.
Ms. Zagady?
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks so much for the opportunity. My name is Liz Zogby, and I'm here on behalf of the Education Advocacy Coalition, a coalition of approximately 40 organizations and individuals concerned with education policy for students with disabilities in Maryland. First, we are so grateful to the AIB for including a special education work group in its initial comprehensive implementation plan. For us, it was a welcome acknowledgement that increasing funding alone is not going to move the needle for students with disabilities. And we view the work group as a historic opportunity that could really make Maryland a leader in transforming special education. And so back in January, EAC forwarded to MSDE and to the AIB suggestions for the work group's membership, scope, and operations. And we looked, as you did, to the model of the ELL work group that led to such strong, comprehensive, and potentially transformative recommendations for that population. Unfortunately, upon reviewing the MSDE plan for the special education work group that was submitted with its implementation plan on March 15th, we were quite disappointed. It is not comprehensive. There is no specificity about scope, tasks, timeline, membership, or operations, despite MSDE having had 3 months to develop it. In its plan, it points to about a dozen advisory boards, steering committees, and work groups that MSD says are at work facilitating the improvement of services and outcomes for students with disabilities. But these groups all have very specific and limited functions, and they're just not relevant to the task at hand as it's defined in the plan, which is a comprehensive and coordinated effort to review special education. The AIB notes in its initial plan that the vision of the blueprint will not be achieved by doing the same things. It requires nothing less than rethinking and redesigning, and students with disabilities deserve that kind of new thinking and reimagining. We've reached out repeatedly to MSDE in an attempt to work together and to discuss our concerns, knowing that a strong plan is needed if the work group is to succeed. And so we ask that the AIB consider the suggestions that we first sent in January and insist upon a robust plan that includes specifics about members, scope, and operations, that the work group will examine data, review best practices and research, and talk to experts in the areas of instruction, teacher quality, and funding, and identify the barriers that have prevented progress in the past and will lead to the implementation of standards, practices, and reforms that will make a difference for students with disabilities. We continue to look for a collaborative way forward so that we can achieve the common purpose that we've all defined as improving outcomes for students with disabilities. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I have one. You indicated that you had made an effort to outreach to MSDE, and you said there was no response, or there was a response?
Correct.
Which is it?
We've had one exchange. Our chair, Leslie Margolis, did have a meeting at one point. However, since the plan came out, we have not, and it was not an opportunity to collaboratively discuss the input that we had provided.
That's since they submitted their plan.
Right.
I get you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Questions or comments? Well, thank you. And now, again, thank both of our speakers for today. The public session is now closed, and we'll go back to the regular scheduled agenda.
Great. So just to go back, just to do the roll call. So present at this time are the chair, the vice chair, Dr. Lynch, Mr. Manco, and Dr. Stapleton. The next item would be to adopt the meeting summary from the last meeting.
Okay, is there a motion to the effect to adopt the summary from the last meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and properly second. Are there any questions or comments related to the motion placed before the table? Are there questions or comments regarding the summary? Okay. Call for the question now. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposition? Hearing none, the summary is now adopted. Thank you. I think what I want to do at this point in time, Rachel, is to go to your comments, if you don't mind, at this point, so that everybody get an opportunity to at least hear those. So why don't we start there? The executive comments, overview.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just have a few updates to provide to the board. I want to make sure, okay, want to make sure I wasn't muted. Okay. The first item is the budget, and as you all know, the fiscal 24 budget was passed by the General Assembly last week. And of course, the General Assembly adjourned sine die on Monday at midnight. The AIB's budget was approved with a full allowance of $4.8 million. There was some budget language added to the AIB to require the board to submit a report by December 1st on alternative quality requirements and structural elements for private pre-K providers participating in publicly funded pre-kindergarten programs. So that is a report, that is some work that we will need to do and submit a report to the General Assembly by December 1st of this year. And the budget restricts $250,000 until that report is submitted and reviewed by the budget committees. That's sort of a standard practice by the budget committees when they adopt reporting requirements to make sure that agencies do them.
Rachel,
Yes.
do you have any preliminary thoughts on how we will go about generating the report?
My preliminary thoughts are that we will probably form a work group, which seems to be an approach that works for us, to bring various stakeholders around the table to talk about alternatives. There were a number of pieces of legislation with different suggestions or provisions around modifying the requirements for alternative providers and for pre-K preparation. And so I think we would want to examine those and the how feasible they are, as well as generate other recommendations for the General Assembly to consider.
I remember during the commission work, we had access to some very impressive experts on early childhood education. And so hopefully we can draw upon some of them to help us with this study.
Yes, that's an excellent idea. Lynn Kagan, who also did speak to the
Yes.
AIB last year as we were starting to work on the comprehensive plan, would be an excellent.
Is an example, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you.
Okay, so the budget also includes full funding for the blueprint formulas and programs. And in addition, the General Assembly added $2 million for the school boards to support the blueprint coordinators, which are required for each county and LEA to have a blueprint coordinator. So there's $2 million in the budget to help them cover the cost of the blueprint coordinators. And they also added funds, $10.25 million to offset the local share requirements in the blueprint for two counties, for Baltimore City and Kent County.
How much was that?
10.25 million, 10 million for Baltimore City and 250,000 for Kent County.
Good.
And then you probably saw this headline, but in addition to the $500 million dollars that the governor had proposed to put into the Blueprint for Maryland's Future Fund when the budget was submitted to support the future costs of the blueprint. The General Assembly added 400 million, so a total of 900 million will be going into the Blueprint Fund to cover out year costs of blueprint implementation.
So what that would take us through what year?
You know, we've been burned on this a few times. So, but if other things hold steady and projections are correct, it would take us into fiscal 27.
Good. Okay. Thank you.
Then I also wanted to give you a brief update on the fiscal 23 budget, the year that we're currently in, and an update on expenditures. So as we talked about at the last meeting, the budget appropriation for the AIB for fiscal 23 was not based on any projections of spending, by the AIB, because the budget was done before the AIB really existed. And so we're in the process of moving monies around to reflect how we are spending dollars. For example, we need to move some more money into contractual salaries out of the general salaries. And we also need to move some funds both from grants and from general salaries to cover some of the technical assistance and contractual services that we've been providing on behalf of the LEAs. So for example, the translation of the plans into the template, and now we're starting the process of translating the LEA plans into Spanish. So those are costs that we need to cover, and we just need to align our spending, our budget appropriation with our spending. We're going to give you a full update on that in June that reflects the all of the adjustments and the alignment of expenditures.
Are there any legal or procedure challenges for being able to that?
No, it's completely permissible, and we have the authority to do that.
Okay. All right.
And then I did also want to let you know that we are working on a proposal. At the last meeting, there was some discussion about potentially providing technical assistance grants to the boards of education. So we are working on a proposal to bring back to the board, hopefully at the next meeting, to potentially provide some funding directly to the school systems to support some of their costs of developing and implementing their blueprint plans.
Okay.
Moving on to legislation, there were obviously a number of bills that passed this session. I wanted to just talk a little bit in detail about a couple of them. The first is House Bill 770, which was the bill that included the recommendation that the AIB had made regarding providing funding for priority children in fiscal 24. And these priority children include homeless children, English learners, and children with disabilities who are not covered under the current formula if they aren't low income, up to 300% of poverty. So that bill was amended to clarify and clarify what the AIB had requested, and also to address the unanticipated fiscal impact of the bill as originally introduced. So there were amendments to that that brought the fiscal note down to about $5.5 million, and it clarified that homeless children are actually now included because most likely they are income eligible. They are low income if they're homeless. So they are now considered tier 1 students, as opposed to, they're still priority, but they're covered permanently as tier 1 students. And what that means is that the school systems, the state and the school systems fully pay for those students, and there's no family share for those students. In addition, the House and the Senate each added different provisions to the bill, which they ultimately worked out in a conference committee to agree on the final amendments. And so that includes, they added a school counselor to the membership of the Consortium for Coordinated Community Supports. This had originally been introduced as a separate bill in Senate Bill 266. They also, in separate legislation, there was a proposal related to the assistant principals and clarifying the 20% teaching time requirement. That was originally there was a Senate bill and a House bill, and instead of passing separate bills, they incorporated that into House Bill 770. And what the language does is it specifies that assistant principals do not need to be the teacher of record in order to satisfy the teaching time requirement. And it also modified the specific requirement to say that they must participate in classroom activity involving direct interactions with students. So that hopefully, as you know, we've received a lot of comments from assistant principals who were very concerned about their ability to meet this requirement. So hopefully those changes help to address that. And then there was also language that amended the career ladder provisions of the blueprint law. And this really just clarified that there's a provision in the blueprint that says that curriculum writers and mentor teachers are to be selected from the career ladder. And the clarification is that they are to be selected from among teachers on the career ladder only when the AIB has determined that the career ladder is well established throughout the state. And that is standard, that is language that is in a number of places throughout the blueprint where certain things don't take effect until the AIB makes that determination. And then the last item I want to talk about in this House Bill 770 is another provision that was added by the Senate originally to the bill that has to do with how low-income families are counted for free and reduced price meal eligibility. And the blueprint specifically requires MSD to develop an alternative state form that schools and school systems would be able to collect from families. And what the bill does is it as of now, MSD has not developed that form yet. So there is no form to be collected. But it says, the bill says that the form, once the form is developed, it can't be required to be collected until one school year after the plan or the form has been developed and that MSD has a public comment period. So essentially what it's doing is it's building in more time before school systems and schools would need to collect the alternative form.
What is there a time frame for developing the alternative form?
Originally, I believe it was supposed to be developed last year. In MSD, in their blueprint implementation plan that they submitted on March 15th, they indicate that they are planning to develop it this summer.
Okay.
So that would at least mean it wouldn't take effect until not this coming school year, but the following school year.
Okay.
Were there any other questions on House Bill 770?
No, go ahead, sir.
Okay, and I see Dr. Doss has joined us.
Yes, hello, everyone. My apologies for being tardy.
Happy to have you. The other bill I wanted to just go over is House Bill 1219. This is the Educator Shortage Reduction Act of 2023. This is the administration bill that was introduced. And it did pass with a number of changes to it. And I will just highlight some of the major changes that, you know, specifically affect the blueprint. And I think the first and the biggest one is that the deadline for, so the statute currently requires pre-kindergarten teachers and teaching assistants to meet the new high quality standards by the 25-26 school year. And the bill provides 2 additional years before teachers and teaching assistants have to meet the high quality standards. So the 27-28 school year rather than the 25-26 school year. And as you know, we've received a lot of, there's a lot of concerns among childcare providers and school systems about the ability for teachers and teaching assistants to be able to meet that requirement by the timeline that was in the blueprint. So that is now extended by 2 years. And then there's also provision that specifically authorizes alternative programs for early childhood certification. So for teachers, pre-K teachers, to utilize a criteria to be developed by MSDE that would evaluate the knowledge and skills from prior learning related to early childhood as part of the certification program. So this is a concept that we heard quite a bit about in commentary as we were developing the comprehensive plan in terms of a number of staff that have worked in childcare and preschool programs for a number of years, and that there should be some way that they could get credit for that, particularly as part of their the required practicum experience that is required for teacher certification. So that is something that we will probably want to be considering as part of the work that we do for the pre-K report for the General Assembly.
Okay.
The other provision that I want to highlight for you relates to the Teaching Fellow Scholarship. And that is originally in the bill, the administration had proposed reducing the mandated funding for the scholarship. The final bill does not reduce the funding for the scholarship. So it maintains the mandated funding that the blueprint calls for. But they did make other changes to the scholarship. They removed the Maryland residency requirement, and they also removed the minimum GPA assessment, like SAT scores, ACT scores, and class rank minimums that were required in order to qualify for a scholarship. They removed all of those in an effort to expand the utilization of the scholarship. And they also altered the service obligation, which teachers who receive the scholarship are required to teach in certain types of schools. Originally, it was schools with 50% and more students eligible for free and reduced price meals. Under the amended bill, it is schools with high needs, which is as defined by MSDE, or with shortage areas in grade or content areas, and that also to be identified by MSDE. So those changes were made to the Teaching Fellow Scholarship. There were also some changes made to the loan assistance repayment programs that for teachers that now includes mental health professionals. And there is also an additional $5 million in the budget for the teacher loan assistance repayment programs. And then the final provision I want to mention is a new pilot program was created that is called the Teacher Development and Retention Program. It is it's a 6-year pilot from fiscal 24 through fiscal 29, and it will provide stipends for teacher education majors. And it's sort of broken up into two phases. The first phase, which is for the next 3 years, would provide stipends for teachers to participate in experiential learning opportunities prior to their final year of teaching when they enter into the practicum. And then in addition, from fiscal 27 through 29, there is a stipend to support teachers while they're during their practicum. And this is again something that we heard a lot of concern about as we were developing the comprehensive plan, that particularly with the extended time required by the blueprint for the practicum to the equivalent of a full school year, that it is hard for teachers and who are students and student teaching to do that while potentially needing to have another job in order to pay tuition and that kind of thing. And there is $10 million in the fiscal 24 budget for this new pilot program. And I will mention that there is a provision in the bill that limits the stipends to certain institutions. So only students that are attending an institution with at least 40% of their students that are eligible for Pell Grants can receive a stipend under the bill, can receive one of these new stipends. Are there any questions about House Bill 1219?
Yeah.
Obviously, we're going to do a deeper dive into all this as we develop the updated comprehensive plan. Okay, and then the last thing I'll mention on legislation is the House Bill 1196, which was another bill that was introduced and that almost made it through the process, but it did not quite make it through both houses by midnight on Monday. And House Bill 1196 had a couple of provisions. As introduced, it mandated state funding for blueprint coordinators. And I mentioned earlier that there's money in the fiscal 24 budget to help the LEAs pay for the blueprint coordinators. The bill would have mandated the funding in fiscal 25 and 26. So that's still something that the General Assembly, the governor or the General Assembly could include in the budget in those years. Another provision was added to the bill by the House and then approved by the Budget and Tax Committee, but again, it didn't make it through the full process and back over to the House before sine die. That provision would have extended the interim program evaluation that the AIB is required to do on the blueprint. We're required to hire a consultant to do an interim program evaluation. Under current law, that interim program evaluation is due to be completed in October of 2024. The bill would have extended that date by 2 years, give or take, to December of 26. But again, it did not pass. And so while, we have a sense from both houses that they would like to delay the evaluation, we're going to need to move forward with it on the original timeline for now. And there is $250,000 in the budget to help support that, the program evaluation requirement each year in the budget. Mr. Manko, do you have a question?
Yeah, sorry about this. To go back, two questions.
Yep.
One, to go back to the Teacher Fellow Scholarship, was the GPA minimum was lowered or was it removed completely? And there's actually no GPA minimum.
It was removed completely.
Okay. And then the second question is for this new pilot program with the teacher development. I know I recall there were some LEAs that had applied their Maryland Leads grant to go through and run some of these pilots where they were funding the student teaching experiences. And I was wondering if there if those Maryland Leads experiences help to inform the construction of this new pilot program. Do you have any insights in that, or?
Since not specifically, what I would say is that since those grants are really just getting started, I'm not sure that there is really any data yet to go on. But it may be helpful as the pilot program is implemented, and the Higher Education Commission is charged with implementing the program.
Yeah.
I think in consultation with MSDE. So hopefully it could be informative as they're developing, for example, MHEC has to actually set the amounts of the stipends.
Sure.
And I'm just going to double check to make sure I haven't misspoken around the GPA requirement. I believe that they were removed completely. I think there is a provision that says they have to remain in good standing from year to year, but so what that means in terms of ongoing GPA, but in terms of having a certain high school GPA in order, or GPA in the first year of college, those have been removed.
Thanks.
Sure.
Okay. Anything further, Rachel?
The next item, I just wanted to give you a quick update on recruitment. The executive special assistant position closed on March 31st, and we received over 120 qualified applications. So that's amazing. And we are in the process of reviewing the applications to identify individuals to interview, and we are hoping to identify those candidates in the next week or so, and get the interviews scheduled and bring someone on as soon as possible, as we will be losing our current management associate, Graham Hardig. This is his last full day of work with the AIB. He will be available to us for the next few weeks as we figure out how to do things without him. But I did just want to acknowledge that and thank Graham for all his. After me, he was the first official employee of the AIB, and wish him well as he goes off to start law school in another state.
Yeah, again, thanks, Graham, for all your tremendous work. We could not have gotten where we are today without your consistent and very effective leadership on a variety of things. So thank you. And I know that we will continue to have you available here and there as we go over the next couple of weeks. But congratulations on your next endeavor for school. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure, and I've been so grateful for the opportunity. It's been amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then the other position, we did post the Deputy Director for Operations position. That will close on Monday at midnight. And we've already received a number of really well qualified applicants. So we are moving ahead on that. We're continuing to develop the job notices for the other positions that we still need to recruit for, but we are going to work through processing these two positions and getting interviews scheduled, and before we post more job notices. But we will be posting, within the next month, if not sooner. And we will continue to email everyone and post it on the website. And we've been advertising in the Baltimore Sun and on LinkedIn. And I know folks have been forwarding the notices around, and based on the number of applications we're receiving and the range of applications, we're really pleased with the results.
Along that line, we had talked earlier about the outreach media person, and we had talked about maybe in the interim having that as a contractual position, subject to the approval of the procurement
Exactly. So one of the next positions to recruit for is the outreach and communication director. But that's still going to take a little time. And so, in a few minutes, you're going to be talking about the draft procurement policies. And, once those have been adopted, then, we can, move to, solicit for a communications consultant.
Thank you.
The only other thing I just wanted to update everyone on, I'm sure you all saw that the AIB nominating committee did select 2 individuals to nominate to the governor to be appointed to the board. The governor has 30 days, which is essentially until May 1st to make a decision. And then we do have a board meeting on May 11th. So we're hoping that hopefully that person will have been identified by then and would at least be able to attend the meeting, if not actually participate in the meeting, depending on the timing.
Thank you. All right.
And that concludes my report.
There any questions or comments that want to make? And again, thank you for a very thorough report, and it shows how involved you and others have been in the AIB activities, because there's so much to cover, and to do so much of this in such a relatively short period of time, compressed with the General Assembly and everything else, is quite remarkable. So thank you and the entire staff. Are there any other questions, comments?
Joe, do you have your hand up again? I'm sorry, Mr. Manka.
I do. Sorry about that.
No.
So one of the things that we have talked about on several occasions is, trying to work to diversify the staff in terms of providing more geographic diversity, more racial diversity, diversity of perspectives. Just curious, out of these 120 applicants that we've had for the special assistant and in the recent applications for the deputy director of operations, if how would you I guess speak to our kind of recruitment efforts and our ability to kind of work to recruit a diverse range of applicants for some of these positions in hopes of working to diversify our staff?
Sure. Thanks for that question. I don't have the statistics, but we can certainly compile them. But we reading through the applications for the executive special assistant position, we have a wide range of academic experience, work experience, diversity in terms of race and ethnicity, and also, from various counties in the state. It tends to be, within driving distance, so not too far outside of Central Maryland, but we do have a really wide range of applicants, and part of the process of identifying who to interview involves making sure that that final pool of interview candidates does reflect all of that diversity. Dr. Doss?
Thanks, Rachel. What other positions are slated to be posted aside from the communication outreach director?
So there is also a research and accountability director that we need to hire. And then we have 5 education program / policy analysts and a data sort of fiscal analyst that we will be recruiting for. And we've been working with DBM to sort of streamline the process. And so at this point, we're going to be able to, I think, do one posting for the education program analysts, and then applicants would then identify what areas of expertise or specialty they have, so that we could, do that recruitment all at once and not sort of 5 or 6 separate recruitments.
Makes sense.
Any other questions? I don't see any hands.
Thank you again. Thank you for your report. We'll go on back to the agenda on our next item, which was the procurement policy.
Actually, sorry, Mr. Chair, before we do that, we were going to get an update on the outcome measures work group
Yeah.
from Mr. Manco.
So we're going to go to outcome measures, and I'm going to turn it over to Joe and Laura, I think it is.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if Dr. Stapleton is available over voice, but if not, I am happy to kind of deliver the update. But Dr. Stapleton, I'll defer to you if you are available.
Joe, you go ahead and take care of it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So yeah, I wanted to give just a brief update on the data outcomes work group. Thus far, we've had 4 meetings. They've all been very well attended, which I think speaks to the level of commitment and interest from the folks that were selected to be part of the committee. I think overall the team feels really positive about the composition of the committee members. We have members that are representing many diverse and unique experiences. That's geographically diverse, that's racially diverse, and people with very, very deep expertise around both data and evaluation from a research perspective and an academic perspective, but also from a practical perspective from their work within schools or their work within a district. I want to give a big thank you for the partnership of our ex officio partners, so individuals from the Consortium of Coordinated Care, MSDE, MHEC, MLDS, various members of the local workforce boards, and of course our equity consultants. I think just the kind of amalgam of members of this group have really helped to provide a lot of robust discussion, and I think we've made a lot of progress thus far. As of this point, we have discussed outcome measures for pillars 1 through 4. In our upcoming meeting, we will move on and discuss outcome measures for pillar 5. We're continuing to get input from our ex officio colleagues on potential data sources for a lot of these outcome measures that we've been exploring. Honestly, it has taken a bit longer than anticipated. I think a lot of this, as I said, the conversation has been really robust, and I think we're able to unearth a lot of nuance that I think is going to add to and create a much better product at the end. But I think it has moved at a more glacial pace than we had originally anticipated. But I think the group as a whole, we're committed to making sure that we take the time that it needs to get it right, and really vetting and doing a thorough discussion of the outcome measures before moving on to a robust discussion of both the state level targets and the local targets. But I'll defer at this point to Dr. Stapleton or to Ms. Pellerin or Ms. Heiss, who could add on anything else, since they've been really stalwarts throughout the entire process and the conversation.
The only thing I would add, thank you, Mr. Manco, for the excellent update, is just to give a shout out to the Maryland Longitudinal Data System Center, who have stepped up to help the AIB support the outcome measures work group, and really help provide some additional technical support as we work to actually identify measures and to help us build the sort of the logic models of the blueprint.
I had a question I was asking it. I should have asked it earlier, but are we looking at adopted measures that others have pursued and adopting those to what it is that we want, or are we in effect totally creating a new model outcome measures separate and apart from that? Or is it some combination of both or what? I'm a little of a question about that because it goes back to the question of the time that Joe mentioned that it's taken a little bit longer. And I'm saying to myself, well, are we starting from scratch and reinventing the wheel here? Or are we, in effect, looking at the wheel that's already exists and adopting that to our needs? Does that make any sense to what I'm asking here? Because it goes back to the question of the amount of time that we were talking about. Does that make any sense, Joe, in terms of, or we haven't gotten to that point as of yet?
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense, and I would say that it's been a combination of both, because I think there are clearly some measures that we have a lot of, that have historically been collected, that have been utilized as kind of a gauge or proxy for educational success across the state. But then, I think there are other measures that are being unearthed that we don't have. They are new strategies as implemented by the blueprint that we don't have. Kind of a deep base of knowledge for how to go through and measure the effectiveness. I think it's top of mind because our last meeting we talked a lot about the community schools model, and that's this is a relatively new initiative for us statewide, and going through and collecting data on the success of that programmatically is something that we're still trying to figure out and get our arms around. What does it mean to have implemented a community school strategy effectively across the state? So I would say other things like kindergarten readiness. I think we've had a lot of discussion around that, but there's a tool that exists and some precedent for how students across Maryland have been evaluated in terms of preparedness. So I would say it's a combination of both. There are some metrics that we're leaning on that have been historically utilized, and then some areas where we're having to go through and create the wheel because one doesn't currently exist in that area.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from anybody on the committee or the board in general?
I don't see any hands.
Okay. Again, thanks, Joe, and thanks again, Laura, for your work. I know that this is a very challenging task, but I'm looking for you guys to get us to the point that we can all be satisfied with the outcomes we get. Thank you. Okay, now we'll go to the procurement policy.
Good afternoon.
To us in some fashion, so we've had it, and so we're going to turn it back over to, I guess, to our attorney, Heidi.
Yes, again, Heidi Dutterer, for the record, Heidi Dutterer, our counsel for the AIB. So today we'll be reviewing a procurement policy draft that was circulated to you earlier this week or last week. Just as a basis for where we're starting from, the AIB is exempt from state procurement law pursuant to 5-402G1I of the education article, which means that we have to create our own policy and process for how we're going to conduct procurement for the board. So this policy that's been provided to you is based heavily on the policy that's used by the Maryland Stadium Authority for their procurement. They are also similarly exempt from state procurement law. So we felt like this was, it was a good policy. It included what we needed. And so what we'll do today is I'll just go through the different elements. And if we come to a point where you have a question, please raise your hand or chime in, and I'll do my best to answer those for you. So the first part of the policy are just our whereas clauses, where we talk about what we're trying to achieve. Typically, with a procurement policy, your goals are going to be transparency, fairness and equity, and then efficient and effective procurement and solicitation. Moving down to the first section at the bottom of page 1 and going into page 2 or just your definitions. Did anybody have any questions about those definitions as they were reading through them? And I can't see hands because of the screen sharing. So
There are no hands.
okay, great. Thank you, Rachel.
Yep.
Okay. Again, at the bottom of page 2, number 2, we just restate our exemption from state general procurement law. And then in number 3, we're going to get into the meat of the methods of procurement. So we have your traditional competitive sealed bidding and competitive sealed proposals. Typically, when you think of competitive sealed bidding or request for bids, that's when the board will have a very good idea of what its scope of work is. So essentially, you're looking for 100 widgets, you know exactly the widgets that you want, and you're just looking for price and the ability to deliver. In this case, the lowest responsible bid will be the winner, will be awarded the contract. So this is a pretty straightforward, we know exactly what we need and we're going out to ask for those bids. For competitive seal proposals, this is a little bit different. This is where you know the outcome that you're looking for, generally speaking, but you want to hear the proposals from vendors to see how they're going to get the board from A to Z. So usually in this case, the price is less firm. It might be more of an estimated price as they're doing their proposals. But the board can also do like oral interviews, ask questions of these proposers to get additional information, and they can take into consideration all factors, including price, including timing, including any other details that that the board may deem appropriate when deciding which proposal to choose. And some of the benefits of us having our own procurement authority here is that we don't have to have sort of any special timing for, every time we send out an RFP or an RFB, we can create our own timing. So we'll be able to move a little bit faster than the state process, which will be very helpful to us as we're trying to meet some of our time constraints. We also don't have to use any specific forms. I mean, there's a lot of forms in state procurement, so we can use some of those forms if we like, but we're not going to have to be held to those. Did anybody have any questions on these two sections? These are sort of your standard regular procurement sections. And I don't see any, so why don't we move down to section D on page 4. So this is your expedited procurement. This is expedited procurements. We're going to talk about emergency procurements in a second. So expedited procurements are going to fall sort of somewhere in between a regular standard. We might give folks, 2 weeks to respond to a request for proposal, request for bid. The expedited procurements are when there are these time constraints and we may need to move a little bit faster and have a more expedited process. There are the procurement officer, which I believe typically for AIB is going to be your finance director, but it can be really anybody who has that procurement officer designation. So, some of the rationale that are stated here in this policy for an expedited procurement are to avoid non-compliance with statutory, regulatory, or blueprint comprehensive implementation deadlines. There are a lot of those, so we're going to need to be nimble and flexible to move forward with some of the things that we need to do to meet our commitments to state and local agencies and other stakeholders. We want to be able to do what we say we're going to do. There are always unanticipated issues. I think you all have seen a lot of those timing issues already. So that are outside of your control and outside the control of your staff. So we want to be able to be nimble when dealing with those as well. when we're doing an expedited procurement, the procurement officer is going to need to be able to lay out what the methodology will be for that expedited procurement. Are we going to advertise for 3 days? Are we going to do it on the state's e-Maryland marketplace platform, or are we going to do it just on our own website? What's the justification from those 4 items that are listed for the expedited procurement? And then if there will be sort of a non-competition solicitation. So if we end up having to go sole source for something, and we'll get to that in a moment, what those justifications are. So really the expedited, this is sort of just a middle ground of, there may be various vendors who can provide a service or a good, but we have to move quickly to figure out who they are and whether or not they can provide what the board needs to provide. So are there any questions on expedited procurements?
Yeah, I had a question on that. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Are there any dollar limits on that expedited?
So on all of the procurements, we're going to get down to this in a second, but they match up to the expenditure limitations that are included in your bylaws. So for anything over $50,000, the board is going to have to approve, approve that contract and the award of that contract.
Even for an expedited one?
Yeah, for an expedited one, not, I think when we get down to the emergency, it's the chair.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so Graham, if you could take us down to the top of the next page where it says small procurements. So small procurements are in this policy defined as anything less than $50,000. So anything that is does not need to be approved necessarily by the full board, but will be approved by the executive director or by the chair, depending on the amount. For contracts less than $10,000, competition is still preferred, but not required. For contracts between $10,000 and $50,000, the procurement officer is directed to seek competition if a competitive process is not going to be the most effective way to move forward, then in that case, the procurement officer will put together some justifications and then talk to the chair and the executive director. Moving down to F, non-competitive procurements. So for these are for procurements that are over $50,000. So we just talked about the under $50,000 for the small procurements. Over $50,000.
Let me interrupt you again.
Sure.
Just in case people are not clear about this, please explain what a non-competitive procurement is, so that we are very clear about that. What does that mean again? Sure.
So when we're in this section, so there's really two types of non-competitive procurement, although they to some degree fall into the same category, which is a sole source procurement. So in this policy, a sole source procurement, which is the F2, is permissible if a requirement in a contract is available only from a single vendor. So this is not based on time, as the expedited procurement was, or as we get down to an emergency procurement, where that is. This is really based on who can provide that service. And if the procurement officer can provide a justification that there's only one vendor that can provide a certain service or a good that is needed by the board, then a sole is allowable. So again, what's going to be important with all of these is if you're going to depart from any kind of competitive process, that those justifications be very clear, and that they follow the policy that you're going to be adopting, and that those justifications will be created by the procurement officer and approved by the executive director, the chair, or the board, depending on what level, what the amount of the contract is. So, and again, a sole source procurement is one that is only available from one vendor. Moving down to the emergency procurement, this is sort of your act of God or natural disaster area. I don't know that you all would be dealing with this very much, but one good example would be the COVID-19 experience. So during COVID-19, there was a need to procure very quickly personal protective equipment and gear for workers of, in all industries. So masks and gloves and things like that, hand sanitizer. So it would be, that would be an example. There could be others, but this is just kind of a catch-all. And the limitation here is that it can only be used to avoid or mitigate damage to the environment or to health, safety, and welfare. The executive director, with the prior approval of the board chair, may award an emergency contract by means other than the competitive sealed bid or competitive proposal. And then that procurement would need to be reported to the board as quickly as possible. Okay, so if we could move down to, did anybody have any questions on the methods of procurement? Those are the methods that we just went through. I know that I did that pretty quickly.
Yeah, this is Mar Das. I have a question about sole source. So when you do a sole source, does this mean that there is no solicitation, so to speak, coming in? The director, or I'm sorry, the procurement officer just says that this is XYZ company is the only company who can provide this particular service.
Correct. That is typically the process. There are occasions, I mean, there are times when you might do a competitive RFP or RFB and you only get a single vendor who responds. In some cases, you may decide, okay, we want to go ahead and cancel that solicitation and resubmit it in order to try to get some competition. But if you're convinced that that is the only vendor and that you're not going to get any more competition through a repeat of the process, then that would technically be considered sole source, but you did go through a competitive process. You can also, just if you know that there is only one vendor that does this type of work, and I think depending on how specific your requirements are, there may be very, very few or perhaps only one vendor who can do certain things that this board needs, because your needs are fairly niche. So I think this may be something that you could encounter.
Could I add something on to that that you just touched on and just explain a little bit further? How you write that solicitation also narrows or expand potentially those who may respond to it. And so you have to be very careful about how you write it in such a way that is clearly what you actually need on one terms of goods and services, because you can write it so narrow that by the time you finish writing, precisely that only one person can get it, as opposed to, and so you have to watch that very carefully. And secondly, when you say there's only one source that can perform that, I think there's a caveat or two that's there. Only one source that can perform that within the time frame that you may need it, because there may be others who could do it, but they say, well, we can't get to you until the next 90 days or 100 days, and you need that sooner. And so technically, only one source can do that within that time frame, but you could probably find someone else in a different time frame who may use it. And I think that may qualify as well.
Those are both really good points, Mr. Chair. That second one, especially the requirement, the board's requirement includes the timing. So I think that could be a really big factor as you all move forward, because you're going to need things quickly, and that's where sole source, may come into play. Were there any other questions on this section? Okay, we can move down to number 4. Thanks, Graham. Okay, So inspection of documents, this is, pretty standard. Bids remaining sealed prior to them being opened. The procurement officer cannot disclose the name of any person who has submitted a bid except to people who are responsible for evaluating those bids, which would be board staff and board members in this case. And then, just talking to folks before the bidding process. You don't want to taint that process for those vendors who may wish to bid or submit a proposal. So it's just, we just need to be careful about those kinds of conversations. Okay, we can move down to section 5 if nobody has any questions on section 4. Thank you. The contract term limitation, you don't have to have this in your policy, but this is, again, something that was in the Maryland Stadium Authority policy. I think this is designed to ensure that your contracts are relatively fresh, that you're putting them out, routinely to see if you can get better pricing, or make sure the pricing is still competitive, that there may be other vendors in the sector at that point. So your contracts that are limited for a duration of time, which will be probably most of your contracts, are limited to a maximum initial term of 3 years with renewal options for a maximum total of 5 years. So you could do, one renewal of 2 years or 2 renewals each of 1 year, but your total is going to be 5 years. And then you would need to rebid that contract. Does anybody have any questions on this section? Okay, we can move down to number 6, which is minority business enterprise, the minority business enterprise program. In addition to being exempt from, or as part of its exemption from all of the Maryland General Procurement Law, the AIB is also exempt from the requirements of the Minority Business Enterprise Program, which is a program designed to, ensure that, businesses, small businesses, businesses that are owned by women or other minorities are able to be very competitive in state procurement. So there is that exemption, but having heard all of you talk about how important diversity and inclusion are to you, I went ahead and kept this piece in. This is not prescriptive. This is aspirational. So the board is going to seek to comply with that program. The Minority Business Program goal setting, the state goal is 29% of all, subcontractors, contractors that the board would hire would be, or would contract with would be certified as a minority business enterprise vendor. So that's what we've included here. And so that's what is going to be part of all of the contracts that the board moves forward with is to the extent practicable, they're going to try to conform to the Minority Business Enterprise Program. Does anybody have any questions on this section? Okay, great. We'll move down to number 7 at the top of page 6, going into page 7, I think, or sorry, bottom of page 7. So in terms of advertisement, there's not a time limit on advertisement. This gives you, again, that flexibility that you need. There is a preference for advertising on Maryland's eMaryland Marketplace, the state's procurement platform, but it's not a requirement. So if the board website or some other place makes more sense, I think what we would do is just provide a justification to the board for why we were going to do that. And also just to make sure that we capture what that justification is. All of the competitive, obviously the competitive bids and proposals would need to be would need to be advertised, and to the extent practical, also the expedited procurement solicitations. Any questions on advertising? Okay. Moving on to number 8, conflicts of interest. This is just reminding you of your duty to avoid conflicts of interest. By, if you have financial interests in a firm or a vendor that is bidding on something, that needs to be disclosed, and then probably, you have to recuse yourself from participating in that vote. Okay, contract approval by the board. Number 9, you were asking about this, Mr. Chair. All contracts of $50,000 or more, this again aligns with the expenditure requirements or limitations in the bylaws. Are subject, anything $50,000 or more must be approved by the board, except in the case of emergency procurements, which would be which the chair would be able to authorize, and then would let the board know as soon as possible. Between 25,000 and 50,000 need to be approved by the board chair prior to award, and then up to 25,000 would be approved by the executive director prior to award. All contracts and contract modifications will be reported regularly to the board. Any questions on contract approvals? Okay, we'll move down to number 10, bid protests. This is pretty standard. So for bid protests that arise from alleged improprieties that occur before the bid opening or before the closing date of the receipt of initial proposals, any protests based on those improprieties have to be submitted to the procurement officer before the end of those time periods. Anything else that comes to light after that time period must be submitted to the procurement officer no later than 7 days after the basis for the protest is known. Anything that's received any later than that is considered untimely and will be denied. The form and content of bid protest is in B. It's pretty straightforward, just the name of the protester, something that identifies the procurement that they're talking about, the statement of the reason for protest, and then any supporting documents. Moving down to C. So the board, this may be a little bit of a misnomer. I mean, it is a board determination and finding, but it is delegated to the procurement officer and the executive director. So after a protest is filed, the procurement officer is going to review the protest. This is not considered a contested hearing. So there isn't a whole hearing process that has to occur. So this protest is going to be considered just on the written documents. The procurement officer will review all the documents, provide a proposed determination to the executive director. The executive director would consider the protest and then issue a determination and finding on behalf of the board. From that determination and finding, if a protester wanted to appeal that determination, they have 7 days from the date of receiving that determination and finding. The appeal has to be in writing and include a copy of the initial protest. Anything that's not received within 7 days after receipt by the protester, and we'll know when things are received because we're going to be sending them certified return receipt requested. So that will start the clock for the 7 days. If now at the appeals level, if a protester wants a hearing, within this policy, a hearing, they can make a request for a hearing. And if they make that request, the board can either conduct a hearing on its own, or it can delegate its authority to conduct the hearing to the Office of Administrative Hearings. That is allowed by Maryland's Administrative Procedures Act. At the conclusion of whichever hearing, whether it's the board or Office of Administrative Hearings, the board issues a decision on the protest. And then at that point, that is a final decision, and the protester would have exhausted all their administrative remedies and could take the issue to court. Anybody have any questions on this section of appeals and protests? Okay. Moving on to contract awards in section E. So if a protest has been filed, typically the board will not award the contract until there's been a final decision on the protest. However, the board can award a contract before that final decision if it makes certain determinations. Generally speaking, there could be fluctuations in the market that could impact costs if you wait too long, or the proposed the awardee may not be able to make that same offer if the timing goes on too long. So moving down to number 11, it's our last section. Contracts voidable for non-compliance. So the difference between void and voidable is that a contract that's void is automatically void upon the occurrence of certain events. A contract that's voidable is the board in this case would be able to make a decision about whether or not it wants to void a contract. So if the board finds that a procurement has violated policies and procedures, the board could still decide to move forward and ratify the contract if they decide that all parties have acted in good faith. That ratification, meaning that you're going to accept the benefit of that contract, would not undermine the purposes of this chapter, which is the chapter on voidability, this section, and that the violation is sort of in the great scheme of things insignificant. So if the contractor has not acted in violation of these policies and procedures, the board has the choice of either moving forward with ratification. If they find that it's in the best interest of the board, we would need to make that specific finding, or they can void the contract if and really the same thing for if they find that the contractor has acted in violation. But they would need to, in this case, the board would need to find, if they wanted to move forward with ratification, that they would need to, I think, also add in that this would be without prejudice to the board's future right to appropriate damages. So you're preserving your right to just, seek damages, but you can still move forward with ratification of the contract. Were there any questions on this last section?
Yeah, I have a question, and maybe covered in some fashion, or overlooked it. Not a contract that is void or voidable based on non-compliant, but the contract is compliant. But in most government operation, which we are maybe exempt from, there's a phenomenon known as termination for the convenience of the government. We just decide, well, we no longer need widgets. We need something else. And so we're going to terminate the contract for the convenience of the government. There's no ill compliance by the contractor, but that happens, and it has happened in a number of places. And the protection from that basically goes to the level of damages of which you would have to pay, as opposed to what you would normally pay for a contract completely extinguished, and the overall damage goes with that limits to some degree the damage. The question one would be, are we protected by that, or are we in a different realm, or that concept accepted? I just don't know. Just coming to conclusion. For example, we are going back to the discussion we had before, where we were talking about the outcome measures, and we proceed on a direction that we think provides us with the kind of outcome measures we want. Midway through that process, Joe comes back and said, you know what? There's a totally different concept that has come about that really is far superior to anything that we're looking at. And what we are pursuing now based on the contract is completely out of date. We need to go to this other process. We would have to either terminate for the convenience of the government on one side and move to something totally different. That's available to most governments. And I was questioning whether or not we are protected by that. If not, could we be?
Right, Mr. Chair. So what I can tell you is that, yes, most state contracts include a termination for convenience clause. And I would love to have a broader discussion of this in a closed session if we could.
Okay.
Thank you. And was there a second part to that question? I feel like there might have been, and I might have missed it.
That was it. And I think that was also for a closed session as well. So.
Okay, great. So that.
Questions or comments on what Heidi
I
is?
have a, hi, I'm sorry that I'm not on camera being in transit, but I have a question that I'd like the board to consider about number 5, contract term limits or term length limits. And I was trying to think about what sort of contracts we might have that would go over 5 years. And one of those might be, and I have no opinion at this point, I just trying to think about this, but the evaluation component, we will have an interim evaluation as well as a final evaluation. And so is there any reason why we might want to have a longer than 5-year contract for that to retain the same vendor because of the knowledge that would be gained? I'm going to mute myself.
Could you hold that point just 1 second? Now, your question just spurred the other component of that. That is extending or amending or changing existing contract, which may get to her point. Is that conceivable or possible? Because you may want to continue the same vendor and just simply amend the existing contract that may go beyond 5 years.
So generally speaking, if you're going to amend amendments for procurement purposes would not include extending terms or changing price or things like that. It could be something less substantial. So I do think if you wanted to have longer term contracts, this section 5 is where we'd want to have that conversation.
Okay.
Heidi, can I clarify? Section 5 refers to initial term of 3 years and renewal up to 5 years. So for a total of 8 years, correct?
That is not what the language currently reflects, but we can make that, what the language currently reflects is that a maximum of 5 years. So it would be 3 years and then another 2 years, or 3 years and then 1 and 1, but it's a maximum of 5.
I thought we had talked about that because the issue that Dr. Stapleton raises is something I had thought of too.
Sure. And I apologize if that doesn't reflect that. So we can certainly make.
Would that address your concern, Laura?
Well, yeah. If we are needing to go to 2032 for the evaluation, the final evaluation, I don't know. It all depends on how we write this contract that we will have to be sending out for RFP soon for the interim as well as final evaluation. And I don't know if we want to couple those. I think there are advantages to coupling them, but there's probably also disadvantages.
Yeah, but this doesn't suggest that we will do it. It just suggests that we would have the authority to do it if we wanted to do it based on what was just stated a moment ago.
Right. If we removed 0.5, that we would have the ability to. So I'm not sure how much we need to have number 5. I don't know of other contracts that we would have ongoing that we would want to need or have to limit. Given that we're not going to be a long-term entity.
We got 10 years, and right now, based on the language that's there, it's 5 years and without some complications. So you may want to either, based on what you're saying, either take that out altogether or give the 8 years that was talked about before. But clearly, we want to change the 5 years, I guess what you're saying. So the question would be, would it be best not to have a limit there, or would it be best to have the 8 years?
And you could do either.
Yeah,
Just from a legal perspective, either one is fine. And also I do want to just remind you all that you can come back and amend this policy at any time of your choosing. So if you decide you want to take it out now and put it in later, or change it to 8 years now and then take it out altogether later, you can absolutely do that.
Dr. Stapleton?
I I don't know. I'm comfortable with either the 8 years or the taking it out altogether.
Why don't we take it out?
Um,
That's easier, and then we could adjust it as we go forward and make an amendment to it. And so, since we're still in the process of evaluating the contract before we finally vote on it, why don't we exclude that portion? And if need be, once it's adopted, we can always come back as stated and make any other adjustment we want. So we're going to strike that unless there's some objection to it.
Sounds like a plan.
All right. Heidi?
Well, that concludes my presentation. If the board, Mr. Chair, if you are prepared to call for a vote on
this before we could decide, because we need to start this other process, and we're way behind what we thought we would be before. So we held up on some hiring decisions until we do this. So is there a motion to approve the recommended with the changes on eliminating section 5 for approval by the board, the procurement process policy?
So moved.
There's a second to the motion?
Second.
Okay, it's moved and properly second that we adopt the procurement policy. That question now is open for discussion or comment. I can't see if there are any questions or hands up.
Nope, no hands are up right now.
All right, seeing none. All in favor of the adoption of the procurement policy, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any
Aye.
opposition to it? Hearing none, the policy is adopted. So we will now, I'm trying to think here. We are probably close to our closing session, to go closed session at this point. Anything else we need to cover prior to?
One more item on the public agenda, which is related to the LEA Blueprint Implementation Plan.
Oh, yeah. I'm looking at it right here in front of me.
It's all right.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chair,
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me, so why don't we go ahead and.
let me go ahead and just provide a little context. So, as you know, we received blueprint implementation plans from the 24 school systems, MSDE, the CTE committee, and the Consortium for Coordinated Community Supports on March 15th. And we scrambled to get all of those posted to the AIB website immediately so they were available for the public. The implementation plan tab on the AIB website, AIB at maryland.gov, is where you would find those plans posted. Since then, AIB and MSDE staff have been reviewing the LEA plans for whether they meet the minimum guidelines. And as a reminder, the blueprint law for the LEAs automatically withholds 25% of the annual increase in blueprint funds beginning in fiscal 23, with the release of those funds based on the AIB's approval. For fiscal 23, you may remember that last session, we worked with the General Assembly to modify the statute so that the initial release of the fiscal 23 funds would be based on whether the plans meet the minimum guidelines rather than approval of the plans, because there wasn't enough time to potentially do all that. And so the minimum guidelines were specified in the initial comprehensive plan that you all adopted in December. And those include a maximum page length of 99 pages. And this is 99 pages in addition to the 99-page template. So the full plan cannot exceed 198 pages. They're also required to provide a response to every question. We're not looking at whether the response is complete or not, just that there's a response. And that includes all of the data tables in the template. Also that all of the what are called linked artifacts or documents that they're providing links to outside of the plan are accessible. Like when you click on it in the plan, it takes you to the linked document. And then also for the data that's being reported, that the required suppression of confidential data was done, as well as other data adjustments, like, you know, that there's a zero, nothing is left blank. There's a zero or an NA or something, so that it's clear what the data actually is. So those are the minimum guidelines. And so both AIB and MSDE staff have been working very hard to review all of the 24 plans for those provisions. And except for one school system, all of the LEAs did need to make some corrections to their plans in order to meet the minimum guidelines. And I will say that that one school system is Baltimore City, that did not need to make any corrections. So for the other 23 LEAs, AIB and MSDE staff worked with them to you know, make sure they understood what needed to be corrected and provide support if they needed it in order to make those corrections. A lot of the corrections related to data suppression for small student group sizes, as well as, like I described, leaving blanks instead of putting a zero or an NA in data tables. And also we had a lot of technical challenges with hyperlinks not working. So that's been very challenging, and we're going to work on a different process for the future for that one. So if you or folks watching us have been accessing plans and you would click on the name, and then you would be taken maybe to a folder with a lot of documents. All of those documents are the linked artifacts in addition to the plan. Now, when you go and click on an LEA, it should take you, in every instance, it should take you to their plan. And within that plan, you should be able to click on any document and it should open and take you to that document. So we feel like that's really important for the public to be able to, not just the public, everyone, all of us too, but to be able to access all of those documents easily. And so we gave the school systems until April 3rd to submit their corrected plans. We actually extended that because of the various spring break closures that were not all at the same time. So as of Tuesday, all of the corrected plans are posted on the AIB website.
And so our task today is to adopt a resolution on it.
Right. So our recommendation, the AIB staff recommendation to you, is to approve the release of the fiscal 23 blueprint funds for all 24 LEAs because their plans all meet the minimum guidelines.
So I'm going to go ahead and make that motion so that we would have it officially on the record. Is there a second to the motion?
I second the motion.
All right, so moved and second that we approve so that we are officially okay in the release of stated revenue. Are there a question or discussion on the motion before us? So we're clear about what we're doing.
Technicians, if you are next in queue.
I can't say if there's a question. I'm not sorry.
I do not, there are no hands up.
Okay. Excellent. Okay, we're now prepared to vote on the motion. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 I,
Aye.
Any- Hearing none, the motion is approved. Thank you, Rachel.
Yes, so very quickly, let me just give you a little more update. So as a result of this vote now, no funds will be withheld from any of the LEAs because the process that MSDE and AIB agreed on for fiscal 23 is that any funds that were going to be withheld would be taken from the final payment in May. Since we're not to May yet, none of those monies will be withheld. And Mr. Chair, in response to an issue that you raised at the last meeting, we've been talking with MSDE about using this same process for fiscal 24, meaning that no funds will be withheld from any of the LEAs until May of 2024. And that will allow time for the process of reviewing and approving plans and LEAs to revise their plans until they're ready for approval to go beyond July 1st without having any funds being withheld from the LEAs until there's been an actual determination that they should be withheld.
Okay.
Okay. And then just very quickly, we are in the process of reviewing all of the LEA plans, the AIB staff and external reviewers. And the State Department of Education is also conducting a parallel review process to determine the recommendations that it will make to the AIB. And we anticipate recommending any plans that are recommended for approval by both MSDE and AIB staff. We anticipate bringing those forward to you on a rolling basis beginning at the next board meeting on May 11th. Any plans that are not ready for approval, MSDE, AIB, and will work with the LEAs to identify very specifically what sections of the plan need to be revised and work with them to revise their plan so that they meet the expectations.
Okay.
Ultimately, though, there does need to be a deadline by which a plan, LEAs have to submit sort of their best plan, revised plan, and a decision about whether it's approved or not will need to be made so that the appeal process that the AIB will be developing provides enough time for an LEA to appeal if the decision is to not approve their plan and withhold funds before we get to that May of 2024 date when the monies would actually be withheld. So that'll be part of the consideration for developing the appeals process.
Yeah. Let's come back to that date and figure what that would be once we've talked about the appeals process and everything else. Then we need to back the dates consistent with what you've just described.
Yeah, exactly. And then just the last thing I want to mention is I don't want to leave out the state plans. So we did receive 4 state plans and have been reviewing those. But we have prioritized the LEA plans because of the automatic withholding of funds provision, which does not apply to the state plans. The AIB does have the authority to withhold funds from the state agencies if you so choose, but it's not automatic.
Gotcha. Okay. There's anything else from you?
Yeah, Rachel, real quick. MHEC has not had a leader. They're about to get one. Did we get a plan from them?
We did. We absolutely did receive a plan
good.
from the Higher Education Commission.
That's great. Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
I think Joe had his hand up.
Yes, that's what I was just going to say, Mr.
I don't know if he got his question answered or what.
I mean, I think some of this just got clarified, but just so that I, can get my arms around this, even though funds are being released in total based on this minimum threshold that LEAs have met for this iteration of the plan, each of the plans will still be scored using the approved criteria for success, and it's still incumbent upon the LEAs to go through and make modifications to their plans in order to ensure that their plans are fully approved, regardless of whether funds are going to be withheld for this particular year.
Yeah, so let me clarify. So, and it is it's complicated. So in this first year, the plans that were submitted in March of 2023, so what I call the 2023 plans, are subject to two different withholding of funds, fiscal 23 and fiscal 24. So for fiscal 23, the release of funds is just based on the minimum guidelines, that minimum threshold that all 24 LEAs have now met. But the plan approval is still needed to get release of the fiscal 24 funds. So, and that is where if their plans are not approved in whatever appeal process, timeline we have, if their plans are not approved prior to May of 2024, then those funds will be withheld based on their 2023 plans. They will then submit another plan in March of 2024, and the approval of that plan will affect fiscal 25 funding. So we're trying to get in the posture where we're approving, it's withholding the next year's funding rather than the current year's funding. That's what we're trying to get at. Any
So
other questions?
Not applicable for next year. That's only for this year that we're approving right now. A portion of the
minimum guidelines, right? Exactly.
Anything else, Joe?
No, I mean, the only two other things that I have in mind is, just based on the public comment from earlier on, right? I mean, I think that a lot of this is, I think what Buzzy was speaking to in terms of accountability mechanisms for the LEAs, which, I think you just explained that thoroughly, Rachel, in terms of, the plan approval, being, impacting the future year funding. And then I guess the second is the comments from Ms. Zogby around the special education work group, which was something that was called for and is something that, I presume is supposed to be, or, was designed to be part of the MSDE plan. And, I guess what the path forward is to ensure that the work group gets established as was called for in the comprehensive plan.
Well, we haven't approved the MSDE's plan. And so I guess if you're asking that question, that's where we will get to the details of what we believe is missing. They are saying to us that it's insufficient. We have to make a separate determination, and we can make that once we go through their plan. And I guess that's the process we're going to follow. Is that correct, Rachel?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
yeah, thanks for the clarification.
It's still before us. And that's the point that they were making today, that their plan didn't live up to what we had anticipated that they would do. We just have to go through and make that determination and then determine what we want to do about it. And that's still before us. Thank you for your question. Clearing it up.
That actually reminded me, there was one more thing I wanted to just mention. So we now have this public comment period at each meeting. In addition to that, we are going to be posting a written feedback form for anyone who would like to provide written comments to the AIB on any of the blueprint implementation plans. So whether it be an LEA, one of the state entities, we will be, just like we did with the public hearing written comments, we'll be tracking all of those comments, sharing them with all of you. And anyone in the public, it'll be posted on the website shortly. And you can submit as many forms as you want about as many different plans as you would like.
Wonderful, thank you. One other thing that I talked about the last meeting, and I think you need to give some further clarification on that, Rachel. That is the expert review team. Remember the issue that I raised because I was not satisfied with the number and the pace. And I don't want to just leave that out there because it was such a long discussion about that. So that we have doubled back on that and sort of good news, bad news. So why don't you walk us back through our subsequent discussion for everybody.
Sure. Sure. Well, I'll start with the good news. We've had some additional discussions with MSDE staff who are in full agreement that the pace of expert review teams and visits needs to be accelerated to make up for the delay. And so MSDE will be submitting, I think they are right now looking at, 2 potential scenarios for the number of visits that could be done over the next couple of years. So they will be submitting their proposal to the AIB for approval. And they're planning to recruit additional, even though they do have quite a number of expert review team members, they are going to need more to do additional visits this year, in the upcoming year. And so they are going to be recruiting for additional expert review team members soon.
Okay.
I think you referred to the bad news. I think the bad news is just that that
worse than I articulated, I think.
Yeah, that originally the visits would have started in the 21-22 school year. So there were no visits that year because obviously everything was, nothing was ready to roll. And now there have been, and there, the 2022-23 school year has now, originally MSC was going to be doing 50 visits, and essentially there will not be any. And so we are 2 years behind on expert review team visits. But again, the good news is that MSD is working on a plan to accelerate the visits and, cover, make up for that lost time in the next 2 years.
Okay, thank you.
What happened to the visits for the 2022-2023? Yeah.
So you may recall in the fall, well, last summer, the MSD submitted a proposal and a deployment plan where they would visit 50 schools this year. And they were going to spend the fall doing additional pilot visits to prepare for the official visits that we're going to start this spring. Developing the rubric that the expert review teams would use to do their visits has taken more time than anticipated. And so at the last meeting, Dr. Collins shared the revised draft rubric, but it is still a draft. And so I believe that they're going to conduct a couple more pilot site visits this school year, and then plan to start the official visits in the next school year.
Okay, any other question or comments? Mara, Dr. Dawson, that's all you had question on?
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. If not, we are now prepared to go into closed session. I think that we're going to have a motion to adjourn the regular session, and then we'll have the usual statement for session. I'm not sure which comes first. I think we need to make the
You need the motion to go into closed session with the statement.
Yeah, I don't have, believe it or not, I think I'm looking at it here, but I can't get it back up, so read it for me.
Heidi, could you read the?
Sure. The motion is to close the meeting. The board anticipates and expects to conduct administrative functions and also to receive legal advice from counsel pursuant to 3-305B7 of the General Provisions Article of the Annotated Code of Maryland. Is there a motion to move into closed session?
So moved.
Second. Okay, it's been moved and properly second that we adjourn or that we go into closed session pursuant to the code identified by our counsel. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Okay, any opposition? All right, hearing none, the motion passes. Now we'll adjourn the regular meeting. There's the motion to adjourn.
So
You'll
moved.
actually adjourn from the closed session, Mr. Chair.
You're going to adjourn from the closed session, that's right.
Yes, sir.
Okay. We're going to take 10 minutes and we're going to flip over to the, I guess they're going to send us the additional link here. Someone's going to send us a link to the closed session, or we're going to stay here.
We're going to send you a link, and I'm actually also right now putting it in the chat for everyone. And it's also in your meeting invite calendar. But we'll also email it just so everyone has it. Okay.
Thank you.